Hi, this is Kirby Sommers, and today we're going to be talking about J.E.'s bodyguard, who is Russian, and he also was sent by J.E. to do something with the CIA. And I don't know how many of you know this. However, what I want to share with you, and bear with me for a second because I have to open a book, is that when I began on this journey, I was very quickly approached by Bill Hamilton, the founder of Inslaw, who, of course, is the person from whom Robert Maxwell, who also was an intelligence asset for Russia, stole the Promise software with his handler, Rafi Eitan. And he and I, communicated quite a bit. And during one of his email inquiries to me, he wanted to know what I knew about JE's connections to Russia. And so, what I did at the time is I sent him a list, which I'm not going to cover in this podcast, but I will in a future podcast. I sent him a list of the contacts. I knew that a JE, who, by the way, I have to use his initials because sometimes on this platform, we don't know if it's going to be kept from you, if I'm going to be able to play this, or so. In order to keep things safe, there are some names like the JE name that I have to use initials for, and other words that are deemed to be unfit on this platform, which I will have to use a substitute for. However, in Relentless Pursuit, a book by Bradley Edwards, who is one of the major attorneys for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, people that came forward. Not everyone came forward, but among them, Virginia. He wrote a book, and in it is a chapter called The Bodyguard. Now, on the screen, I have an image of the bodyguard, and he was a professional fighter, and he was also JE's, he was the guy who made sure that he was protected at all times. So I'm going to read this, or at least as much of it as I can, from Bradley Edwards' book. On my trip home, I thought about a story that Sarah Ransom had shared with us when she explained that she was so desperate to escape, she attempted to swim off Epstein's island. She explained that Epstein's bodyguard witnessed the whole thing and would corroborate her story. When I returned, I called the bodyguard right away. He told me to meet him at Starbucks. This former bodyguard was a Russian mixed martial arts fighter hired by Epstein to provide security. With this type of background, I mistakenly assumed he was a cold hearted, rough guy who protected whomever he was hired to protect and who would never share details. By all appearances, he truly seemed like a movie character who was meant to defend someone evil. The bodyguard seemed like someone whom Russian mobsters would hire, but he didn't sound like a bad guy when I called to set up our meeting. He had a secretive way about him, like a robot that was put on earth not to gossip about anyone or anything, but he wasn't the heartless character whom I had previously believed him to be. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't excited to meet me, but he had agreed to do so. When I got to the Starbucks that night, I was early as usual. It was nice out, so I picked a table outside. He had no idea who I was or what I looked like, even though we had crossed paths outside of depositions and meetings I'd had with Epstein several years before. He arrived within minutes, walked inside to grab a coffee, then looked around until our eyes met. He didn't hesitate before walking in my direction, knowing somehow that it was me. He didn't want me to take any notes. I put my pen down and prepared to listen. I asked him how he got started with Epstein and what he saw during his employment. He was hired initially because Epstein was worried that some girl's dad would try to unalive him. While I had never heard anyone say that Epstein had this fear, I had often wondered how it never happened. He continued to talk in a low voice, primarily on the subject of young females in Epstein's life. He confirmed what many others by this point had said, that Epstein's entire life, from the time he woke up to the time he went to sleep, revolved around young women. As soon as Jeffrey got out of jail in 2008, there were girls at his house all the time. The only thing that changed was the target age of his victims. They were all promised something that Jeffrey would do for them. And at some point, this bodyguard expressed concern to Jeffrey about his misleading them. He said, "You just got out of jail. You can't keep doing this with these girls." He made it clear that Epstein was engaging in the same conduct that landed him in trouble in the first place, but with a slightly older age group, focusing his attention not on rounding up high school kids, but on the modeling industry as his recruiting playground. These were girls who believed they were there whenever, wherever there was, at any given moment for a legitimate reason, not illicit S. But Jeffrey's purpose with them was S and only S. His bodyguard watched as dozens of young, aspiring models were lured into Epstein's world before being discarded, more broken than before. When this bodyguard told Epstein that he shouldn't keep doing this with the girls, he said Epstein responded, "Don't act like my grandma or you will be fired." Yes, he confirmed that Sarah tried to swim off the island, but her attempt showed no greater level of distress than he'd seen in other girls throughout the years. The rest of our meeting had little to do with girls and much to do with the danger he saw me putting myself in with Epstein. He was himself a real life tough guy, yet I can tell he was frightened by Epstein, and he stressed that I should also be frightened. He had no precise information. It wasn't as if Epstein had told him I was a target. He simply made it clear that I was somebody Epstein had talked about, and not in a friendly way. But of course, I already knew that. As we got to know each other, he increased the seriousness of his voice. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I worked for him for years, and I still don't know who you're dealing with. He knows everybody who's powerful in this world." He went on to explain that Jeff's connections were not just to the local police, who were definitely in his pocket, and from whom, when he was in jail and on house arrest, he got so many favors. He elaborated that Epstein made very clear that the federal government would never prosecute him. He also snuck stories in to give me examples of how scary Epstein was. On one occasion, a lawyer was found at the bottom of a swimming pool. Epstein asked him if he thought people would believe it was self unalivement, the S word, as if it wasn't, and suggested that Epstein, had something to do with the woman's demise. So it was a female attorney who was found at the bottom of a swimming pool, in case that was not clear. It wasn't someone I had ever heard of doing during my years of investigating Epstein, and so I had no reason to believe it was a connection to any case I was working on, but the purpose of the message was clear. He went on to tell me that when Epstein was in jail, he still had extraordinary power, even within our own government. The bodyguard had been sent by Epstein to Virginia to CIA headquarters. Nervously telling me the story, he said, "I don't know why I was there, but he told me they would take care of me." I attended a class for a week. At the beginning of the class, everyone had to introduce themselves. There were 45 people. 44 people were in the CIA or some other government unit with top secret clearance. I was the only private citizen. Everyone introduced themselves, and the instructor saved me for last. He did not let me introduce myself. Instead, he just introduced me as what he called a special operative. He explained that he then attended the class for a week before he was given a book with a personalized note and told to deliver it to Jeffrey. He took the book to Jeffrey's seldom occupied country jail and delivered it without reading the contents of the note. Anything else give you any other hints as to Epstein is? I asked. I can only tell you where we went and what I observed, but he goes out of his way not to share any real information. He spends most of his days doing what you know he does, hanging out with his girls, getting massages. The rest is traveling with very specific missions. Most don't last very long. The girls he trusts come along. He told me, I'm going to just read a little bit more. And I just want to very quickly kind of just look at my notes here. Okay. He told me, for instance, about a prince or sultan, he didn't recall which, whom they would meet all over the world. Listen to me carefully. He would meet this one person all over the world. So it was a prince or a sultan, but very likely this person was in fact the man formerly referred to as a prince, namely Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Okay, he just did not remember the name, meaning the bodyguard. And then he adds, Epstein also often met with Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel. Barak visited Epstein in New York as well, and on extended stays took residence at Epstein's 301 East 66th Street apartment. So then he goes on to talk about things that are really, they don't really jump out at me for having to share with anyone. Um, However, what I wanted to do is bring your attention to the fact that he did have a Russian bodyguard. It's really interesting that he doesn't name him. It's very interesting. He only refers to him, meaning Bradley Edwards, as the bodyguard. However, let me just pull up his name so that I can share that with you. Give me a second. Okay. So the name of his Russian bodyguard is Igor Zinoviev, and he was a UFC fighter turned professional bodyguard, again used by JE, as you can see by the image on the screen. So when I do another podcast about the Russian connections to JE, I will include the information I sent to Bill Hamilton many years ago now, um, because I haven't really heard many people talk about this side of it. And I am curious to hear from you guys if you heard about the Russian bodyguard and that he was sent by JE specifically to Langley, to Virginia, to the CIA. And because people are only talking about Mossad, 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 they're not talking about Russia. They're not talking about CIA, but I'm curious to hear if you guys have heard, in fact, about CIA. With that, I'm going to bid you a good weekend and we will talk soon. Bye.